The forensic accountant found $1 million my father had hidden. The forensic accountant's voice was steady, but I watched her fingers tremble slightly as she slid the documents across the mahogany conference table. Ms. Chen, we found additional assets your father failed to disclose in his initial estate filing. I'd been expecting maybe a forgotten savings account, perhaps a small investment he'd overlooked. Dad had always claimed he was barely scraping by, couldn't afford the $800 monthly child support payments after he walked out on us 16 years ago, couldn't help when Mom's car broke down for the third time in 2019, couldn't contribute a dime when my brother Jake needed physical therapy for his cerebral palsy. How much are we talking about? I asked, my coffee growing cold in the sterile law office air. Patricia Holloway, CPA, adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses. $1.2 million, spread across 3 offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. The oldest account was opened 6 months after he stopped paying child support. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt my chest constrict, my vision narrow. 1.2 million. While Mom worked double shifts at the diner and cleaned offices on weekends. While I delivered pizzas until 2 a.m. and still graduated college with $47,000 in debt. While Jake's condition worsened because we couldn't afford the specialist Mom's insurance wouldn't cover. That's... I started, then stopped. What was there to say? That's impossible? That's not the man who claimed he was living paycheck to paycheck in his studio apartment? That's not the father who told me over our last awkward dinner in 2018 that he'd love to help with Mom's medical bills, but his construction business was barely afloat. I know this is shocking, Patricia continued, her voice gentler now. But there's more. We also found documentation of significant cash deposits, regular payments of $15,000 to $30,000 every few months for the past 8 years. Your father's lifestyle expenditures far exceeded his reported income. I thought about his funeral 3 weeks ago. The beautiful service at St. Matthew's Cathedral that his wife Diane had organized. The expensive flower arrangements, the catered reception afterward at the country club. Diane weeping prettily in her black Chanel dress, accepting condolences from their wealthy friends who praised Robert Chen as a generous man, a pillar of the community, someone who'd built his success from nothing. I'd stood in the back with Mom and my siblings, wearing the same black dress I'd worn to every formal event for the past 5 years. We'd felt like intruders at our own father's funeral. His current wife, I said slowly, does she know about these accounts? Patricia shook her head. Mrs. Chen was not listed on any of these accounts. Based on the documentation, your father was the sole account holder with no beneficiaries named. Legally, these assets should have been included in the marital estate and the inheritance calculations. My phone buzzed with a text from my younger sister Emma. Asterisk, how's the lawyer meeting going? Find any buried treasure? Face with tears of joy asterisk. I stared at her message, at that laughing emoji, and something cold and sharp crystallized in my chest. Emma had no idea she was joking about something real. She was 24 and still living with Mom because her teacher's salary barely covered her student loan payments. She'd wanted to be a veterinarian before Dad left, but that dream died along with our college funds. I need copies of everything, I told Patricia, my voice steadier than I felt. Every document, every transaction record, every lie he put in writing. The revenge I was planning would be worth far more than money. Patricia handed me a manila folder thick enough to choke on. There's something else you should know. We found correspondence between your father and his financial advisor dating back to 2019. They discussed strategies to keep these assets hidden during what he called potential family complications. I opened the folder with hands that weren't quite steady. The first document was an email dated March 15, 2019, exactly 2 weeks after Mom had been diagnosed with her kidney stones and needed surgery she couldn't afford. Asterisk Richard, I need to ensure my current family obligations don't interfere with my long-term financial planning. Can we move the Henderson account to a more secure location? My ex-wife has been asking about additional support for medical expenses asterisk. Henderson account? I looked up at Patricia. One of the shell companies he used. Henderson Holdings was registered in Delaware but operated the Swiss account. She leaned forward. Ms. Chen, your father wasn't just hiding money. He was actively restructuring his assets to avoid detection every time your mother reached out for help. I flipped through more emails. April 2020, when Jake needed new leg braces, asterisk move another $50,000 to the Cayman account. Family situation escalating asterisk. December 2021, when Emma's car was totaled and she couldn't afford the insurance deductible, asterisk Richard, I need complete indivisibility on all holdings. The kids are asking too many questions about my financial situation asterisk. Each email was dated within days of our family's crises. He hadn't just known about our struggles, he'd been actively protecting his hidden fortune from us every time we suffered. Son of a bitch, I whispered, then immediately felt guilty for cursing in front of the lawyer. But Patricia nodded grimly. There's more. We found receipts for private investigators he hired in 2020 and 2022. Private investigators? The folder slipped in my suddenly sweaty hands. To monitor your mother's financial situation. He wanted to know about any assets she might acquire, any improvements in your family's circumstances. The reports are thorough. They knew about your pizza delivery job, your sister's student loans, even your brother's medical appointments. I stared at a printed invoice from Brennan Security Solutions, asterisk surveillance and financial monitoring services for client number 447, subjects, Linda Chen, Emma Chen, Jake Chen, Maya Chen. Duration, 6 months. Total, $18,000 asterisk. $18,000 to spy on us. More than double what he'd owed in back child support at the time. The room felt like it was spinning. He was watching us struggle. He had reports about Jake's physical therapy sessions that we couldn't afford, and he just filed them away? According to the investigators' reports, he specifically wanted updates whenever your family faced financial hardship. The final report was dated January 15th of this year, just 3 months before his cancer diagnosis. I thought about that date. January 15th. Right after Mom had to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. We'd eaten ramen and peanut butter sandwiches for 2 weeks while she waited for her next paycheck from the diner. Meanwhile, Dad's detective was documenting our empty refrigerator and reporting back to the man who could have ended our suffering with a single wire transfer. I want to see the investigators' files, I said. All of them. Patricia hesitated. Maya, I have to ask, what are you planning to do with this information? I closed the folder carefully, thinking of Diane's tears at the funeral, of the speeches about Dad's generosity and integrity. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Robert Chen really was. The truth was going to destroy his legacy. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. The private investigator's files arrived by courier 2 days later. I'd taken a personal day from my job at the marketing firm, claiming I needed to handle estate matters, which wasn't technically a lie. I just hadn't mentioned that handling my father's estate involved planning his social destruction. I spread the surveillance reports across my kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. Because that's what this was, really. Evidence of a 16-year crime spree against his own children. Asterisk subject Maya Chen observed leaving Domino's Pizza at 11:47 p.m., March 22, 20. Vehicle, 2009 Honda Civic, multiple dents, exhaust issues noted. Subject appeared fatigued, asterisk. They'd watched me stumble to my car after closing shift, probably noted how I sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes because I was too tired to drive safely. The report continued, financial stress indicators, subject's phone service appears to be on limited plan, observed using restaurant Wi-Fi extensively, clothing repeated across multiple surveillance days. I laughed bitterly. They'd documented my poverty like a nature study. Poor girl in her natural habitat, reusing the same 3 work shirts because she couldn't afford more. The reports on Jake were worse. Asterisk subject Jake Chin attended physical therapy March 15, 20 at Riverside Rehabilitation. Session duration, 30 minutes instead of recommended 60. Mother Linda Chen observed in heated discussion with receptionist regarding payment plans, asterisk. I remembered that day. Mom had cried in the car afterward because they told her Jake's progress would be slower with shortened sessions, but we couldn't afford the full treatment. The investigator had noted her tears too. Primary subject, Linda Chen, displayed signs of emotional distress upon leaving facility. My phone rang, interrupting my rage-reading session. Emma's name flashed on the screen. Hey, how's the estate stuff going? You sounded weird when you called yesterday. I looked at the report dated just 2 months ago. Asterisk subject Emma Chen observed at Eastside Elementary, departed 6:45 p.m. carrying large bag of materials home. Vehicle status unchanged, 2015 Corolla, needs repair work. Subject's lights were on until approximately 2 a.m., likely grading papers, asterisk. Emma, I said carefully, do you remember last winter when your car was making that grinding noise? Yeah, the brake pads. I drove on them way too long because I couldn't afford to fix it right away. Why? How long exactly? Like 3 weeks? Maya, you're scaring me. What's going on? I flipped to another page. Asterisk subject vehicle shows signs of brake system failure. Grinding noise audible from 50 feet. Safety concern noted, asterisk. They'd documented that my sister was driving a death trap, and Dad had filed it away with his other business papers. I need to tell you something about Dad's estate. But not over the phone. Can you come over tonight? Bring Jake too. Maya, you're freaking me out. Just trust me. And Emma? Don't mention this to Mom yet. I want to show you guys something first. After I hung up, I called Patricia Holloway. She answered on the second ring. Patricia, it's Maya Chen. I need to know about legal options for recovering hidden assets. And I need to know about fraud charges. Maya, fraud charges would be difficult to pursue posthumously. Not criminal fraud. Civil fraud. Against his estate, against anyone who benefited from his lies. I was thinking about Diane, about the country club membership and the luxury cars and the renovated kitchen in the house that should have partially belonged to his first family. That's possible. But it would be expensive, lengthy, and very public. Public is exactly what I want. I could hear Patricia's pen scratching against paper. There's something else I found yesterday. Your father made significant gifts to his stepdaughter over the past 5 years. Paid for her private school tuition, her horse riding lessons, even bought her a car for her 16th birthday. How significant? About $200,000 total. While claiming he couldn't afford basic child support for his biological children. I closed my eyes and saw Jake struggling with his walker, Emma grading papers until 2 a.m. to make ends meet, Mom's hands cracked and bleeding from cleaning chemicals. Patricia? Set up a meeting with Diane Chen. It's time she learned about her husband's secret accounts. The war was about to begin. The meeting with Diane was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. in Patricia's office. I spent the 3 days leading up to it meticulously preparing my presentation, because that's what this was going to be. A presentation of evidence that would shatter the widow's carefully constructed world. I'd also done some digging of my own. Turned out social media stalking was a useful skill when you wanted to destroy someone's illusions. Diane's Facebook was a treasure trove of family photos spanning the last 8 years. The posts painted a picture of comfortable suburban life, vacations to Tuscany, anniversary dinners at restaurants where the entrees cost more than my weekly grocery budget, and dozens of photos of her daughter Madison's equestrian competitions. One post from March 2020 particularly caught my attention, right when Jake was getting his physical therapy sessions cut short. Diane had written, asterisk so grateful for my generous husband. Madison's horse Buttercup needed emergency colic surgery and Robert didn't hesitate to cover the $8,000 vet bill. What would we do without this amazing man? Hashtag blessed hashtag family asterisk. $8,000 for a horse's stomach surgery. While my brother limped around with leg braces that hadn't been properly fitted because we couldn't afford the specialist. I screenshotted everything. Wednesday night, Emma and Jake came over as planned. I'd ordered Chinese takeout, a small luxury I could finally afford now that I knew money was coming, and spread all the documents across my living room floor. Holy shit, Jake whispered, staring at the surveillance photos of himself. There were dozens, Jake getting on the school bus, Jake at his physical therapy appointments, Jake struggling with the stairs at Mom's apartment building. Emma was reading the financial records with the same expression she'd worn when she found out Santa wasn't real. Maya, this says he had $47,000 sitting in an account in January. That's exactly how much you said you owed in student loans. That's not a coincidence. I handed her another folder. Look at this. It was an email chain between Dad and his financial advisor from December 2019, when I was struggling to make my loan payments and working 3 part-time jobs. Asterisk Richard, my eldest, is apparently having financial difficulties with her education debt. Should I be concerned about potential legal claims against my estate? Asterisk. Asterisk Robert, statute of limitations on child support has passed in most cases. Your obligations ended at 18. I wouldn't worry unless she lawyers up. Asterisk. Asterisk Richard, good. The last thing I need is her sniffing around my finances. She's smart enough to cause problems if she gets suspicious. Asterisk. He knew, Jake said quietly. He knew we were struggling and he just didn't care. Emma was crying now, clutching a bank statement showing a $30,000 deposit dated the same week she'd eaten ramen for 10 straight days because her paycheck was late. I called him once, in 2021. I was so desperate, and I thought maybe. I told him I was thinking about leaving teaching because I couldn't make ends meet. You know what he said? We waited. He said life was tough for everyone, and I needed to learn to stand on my own 2 feet. He was proud of me for being independent. Her voice cracked. He deposited $25,000 2 days after that phone call. I showed them Diane's Facebook posts, the private investigator reports, the evidence of Madison's $200,000 in gifts while we'd been surveilled like criminals. What are we going to do? Jake asked. I thought about tomorrow's meeting, about Diane's inevitable tears, about the social circle that had praised Robert Chen's generosity. About Madison, who was probably a decent kid but had benefited from money that should have paid for Jake's medical care. We're going to take back what he stole from us. All of it. And then we're going to make sure everyone knows exactly who Robert Chen really was. Emma wiped her eyes. Mom's going to be devastated when she finds out he was watching us this whole time. Mom deserves to know the truth. We all do. I gathered the photos of our surveillance, thinking about how violated I felt seeing myself documented like a lab rat. Besides, she's stronger than we think. She survived 16 years of his lies. She can survive learning about them. But first, Diane Chen was going to learn that her generous husband had been a fraud. I couldn't wait to see her face. Thursday arrived with unseasonably cold rain that seemed to match my mood perfectly. I sat in Patricia's waiting room at 1:45 p.m., watching water streak down the windows while rehearsing what I was going to say to Diane. I'd brought a briefcase, Emma's old teacher bag, actually, filled with copies of everything. Bank statements, surveillance photos, email chains, even printouts of Diane's Facebook posts celebrating Robert's generosity. At exactly 2 p.m., Diane Chen walked through the door, and I was struck by how small she looked. At the funeral, she'd seemed polished and formidable in her designer grief. Today, she wore a simple black sweater and jeans, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked like what she was, a 52-year-old woman trying to figure out how to rebuild her life after losing her husband. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Maya? She seemed surprised to see me. Patricia said there were some estate complications, but I didn't realize you'd be here. There are definitely complications, I said, standing to shake her hand. Her grip was soft, uncertain. We need to talk about Robert's hidden assets. Patricia ushered us into the conference room where this had all started a week ago. Diane took the chair across from me, folding her hands in her lap like a schoolgirl called to the principal's office. I don't understand, Diane said as Patricia began laying out documents. Robert was very open about our finances. We had joint accounts, a financial planner, everything was transparent. Not everything. I slid the first bank statement across the table. Did you know about Henderson Holdings? Diane picked up the paper, her brow furrowing. No, what is this? A shell company your husband used to hide $400,000 from his family. His first family. I kept my voice level, professional. The account was opened 6 months after he stopped paying child support for his 3 biological children. The color drained from Diane's face as Patricia walked her through the offshore accounts, the surveillance reports, the emails discussing family complications. I watched her expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like nausea. This can't be right, she whispered, staring at an email where Robert discussed moving money to avoid my mother's medical expenses. Robert was generous to a fault. He paid for Madison's school, her writing lessons. $200,000 worth of generosity for your daughter, I interrupted, pulling out my own documentation. While my brother's physical therapy was cut short because we couldn't afford it. While I worked 3 jobs to pay for college. While my mother cleaned offices until midnight because her husband claimed he was broke. Diane's hands were shaking now. I didn't know. Maya, I swear to you, I had no idea. Look at this. I showed her the surveillance photos of Jake struggling with his walker. Your husband paid $18,000 to have private investigators document my family's poverty. He had detailed reports about my brother's medical condition, my sister's financial struggles, my mother's working 3 jobs. Stop. Diane's voice was barely audible. Please stop. But I was just getting started. I pulled out my phone and showed her the Facebook posts, her own words celebrating Robert's generosity while he actively hid money from his children. March 15, 2020. You posted about Robert paying $8,000 for your daughter's horse's surgery. That same week, my brother's physical therapy was reduced to 30 minutes instead of an hour because we couldn't afford the full sessions. Diane stared at her own Facebook post on my phone screen. Buttercup was sick, she stopped, seeming to realize how that sounded. Oh God. Oh my God. There's more, Patricia said gently. Mrs. Chen, some of the gifts to your daughter may need to be recovered as part of the estate settlement. Legally, those assets should have been available for child support obligations. You want to take Madison's college fund? Diane's voice rose in panic. She's 17, she's supposed to start at Northwestern in the fall. Your stepdaughter got Northwestern. My sister got community college because it was all she could afford. I leaned forward. Tell me, Diane, is that fair? The room fell silent except for the rain against the windows and Diane's ragged breathing. She stared at the documents scattered across the table like they were evidence of a murder. Which, in a way, they were. Evidence of the murder of everything she believed about her marriage. What do you want from me? She finally asked. I smiled, and I knew it wasn't a nice expression. I want you to understand exactly who you married. And then we're going to discuss how you're going to help me make this right. The real negotiation was about to begin. Help you make this right? Diane's voice cracked. Maya, I'm a widow trying to figure out how to pay my own bills. Robert handled everything financial, and now you're telling me it was all built on lies. Save it. I pulled out another folder, one I'd been saving for maximum impact. Patricia, show her the life insurance documentation. Patricia reluctantly slid a thick document across the table. Mrs. Chen, your husband had 3 life insurance policies totaling $2.8 million. You were listed as the primary beneficiary on all of them. Diane's eyes widened. That's not possible. Our policy was for $500,000. I remember signing the papers. That was just the one he told you about. I watched her face crumble as the numbers sank in. The other 2 policies were purchased with money that should have gone to child support. Money that should have paid for Jake's medical care, Emma's education, my mother's surgery. I can't give you life insurance money, Diane whispered. It doesn't work that way legally. Actually, Patricia interrupted, if we can prove those premiums were paid with assets that should have been available for child support obligations, there may be grounds for a civil suit. The hidden accounts establish a pattern of fraud. I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. Here's what's going to happen, Diane. You're going to help me expose exactly what Robert did to his first family. You're going to publicly acknowledge his deception. And you're going to make financial amends. You want me to destroy my husband's memory? Diane's grief was shifting to anger now. He's been dead for 3 weeks, Maya. Can't you let him rest in peace? Peace? I laughed, and it sounded harsh even to my own ears. He surveilled us like criminals while we struggled to survive. He spent more money spying on his sick son than he ever paid in child support. Where's Jake's peace? Where's my mother's? Diane buried her face in her hands. What about Madison? She loved Robert, he was the only father she ever knew. You want to tell a 17-year-old that her dad was a monster? Madison will still have her college fund, her car, her private school education, all bought with money stolen from my family. I softened my voice slightly. I'm not trying to punish her. But she needs to understand where her privileges came from. You're asking me to blow up my daughter's world. Your daughter's world was built on my family's suffering. I pulled out one more document, the piece of resistance I discovered just that morning. Patricia, show her the trust fund. Diane looked up sharply as Patricia produced another bank statement. Robert established a $300,000 trust fund for Madison's 18th birthday. It was funded entirely through the offshore accounts. $300,000, I repeated. That's more than my family's total household income for the past 4 years combined. Money that could have changed everything for us was sitting in an account waiting to buy your daughter a car or a condo. Diane stared at the trust fund documents like they might burst into flames. I never asked him to do any of this. I thought we were comfortable because Robert worked hard, because he was successful. He was successful at hiding assets from his legal obligations. I gathered the papers into neat piles. Here's my offer, Diane. You help me organize a memorial event, a real memorial where people learn the truth about Robert Chin. You publicly acknowledge what he did to his first family. And you agree to restructure Madison's trust fund to include payments to my mother for 16 years of unpaid support. And if I refuse? Patricia answered before I could. Then Maya files civil suits for fraud, asset recovery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The surveillance alone could be worth substantial damages. And everything becomes public record anyway. Diane was quiet for a long moment, studying the rain-streaked windows. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. How much time do I have to decide? I smiled. Robert spent 16 years stealing from us. I think 24 hours is generous. The next morning, I was at my desk pretending to review marketing reports when my phone rang. Diane's name flashed on the screen, and I felt my pulse quicken. 23 hours and 14 minutes, she was cutting it close to her deadline. Maya. Her voice sounded hollow, exhausted. We need to talk. But not at the lawyer's office. Can you meet me somewhere private? An hour later, I sat across from Diane at a corner booth in Mel's Diner, the same greasy spoon where my mother had worked double shifts for 8 years. The irony wasn't lost on me. Diane looked like she hadn't slept, her eyes red-rimmed and her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her coffee cup. I told Madison last night, she said without preamble. About the money, about the surveillance, about everything. I waited, not trusting myself to speak. She didn't believe me at first. Said I was having some kind of grief breakdown. Diane's laugh was bitter. So I showed her the bank statements. The pictures of your brother. The emails where Robert called you all complications. How did she take it? She locked herself in her room for 3 hours, then came out and asked if she could keep Buttercup. Diane wiped her eyes. That's what she was worried about, her horse. Because she's 17 and doesn't understand that her entire life has been built on stolen money. I thought about myself at 17, working checkout shifts at Target to help pay for groceries. At least she has the luxury of worrying about horses instead of survival. Don't. Diane's voice sharpened. Don't punish her for being a kid who trusted her stepfather. She asked me if she should give up her Northwestern acceptance, Maya. She wanted to know if going to college made her complicit in Robert's lies. Something twisted in my chest, guilt, maybe, or recognition. Madison was probably a good kid caught in the blast radius of her stepfather's deception. But my sympathy had limits. What did you tell her? I told her we'd figure it out. Diane pulled a manila envelope from her purse. I also told her we were going to make things right with Robert's first family, whatever that looked like. She slid the envelope across the table. Inside were photocopied pages covered in teenage handwriting, Madison's journal entries from the past year. She said you should see these. To understand who Robert really was, even to us. I opened to a random page dated 6 months ago. Asterisk Dad's been weird lately. Mom asked him about maybe taking a family vacation this summer and he got all cagey about money. But then yesterday I saw him writing a check for $5,000 to some charity I'd never heard of. When I asked about it, he said I wouldn't understand complex financial planning. I hate when adults talk to me like I'm stupid, asterisk. Another entry from December. Asterisk Dad spent like 20 minutes on the phone today talking about asset protection and family complications from his previous marriage. He didn't know I was listening, but he sounded really stressed. Mom keeps saying we're financially secure, but Dad acts like he's always worried about money. It doesn't make sense. Asterisk. The last entry was dated just 6 weeks before Robert's cancer diagnosis. Asterisk found some weird paperwork in Dad's study when I was looking for stamps. Bank statements from accounts I've never heard of. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Why would he hide money from Mom? And why does one of the files have my name on it with the word trust written in Dad's handwriting? I'm scared to ask. Asterisk. I closed the journal, feeling sick. Even Madison had sensed something was wrong, had seen cracks in Robert's carefully constructed facade. She knew he was lying about something, I said. Kids always know more than adults think they do. Diane took the journal back, handling it like it contained explosives. Maya, I want to make this right. But I need guarantees that Madison won't be destroyed in the process. She's applying for financial aid now, trying to figure out college without the trust fund money. I studied Diane's face, looking for signs of manipulation or deception. But all I saw was an exhausted woman trying to protect her daughter while grappling with the collapse of everything she believed. What exactly are you proposing? Full disclosure. Everything. I'll help you organize that memorial service you wanted. I'll stand up in front of Robert's friends, his business partners, everyone who thought he was generous, and I'll tell them exactly what he did to your family. She met my eyes. But Madison gets to keep her Northwestern acceptance. We structure the financial compensation so it doesn't destroy her future. It wasn't everything I'd wanted. But it was a start. When do we begin? 2 days later, I was sitting in my car outside Robert's old law firm, watching Diane through the glass lobby as she spoke with the receptionist. We'd agreed to start with his business associates, the people who'd known him longest and respected him most. If we could crack his professional reputation first, his social circle would follow. Diane emerged 20 minutes later, her face pale but determined. She slid into my passenger seat and handed me a thick folder. Richard Brennan, his business attorney for 12 years. He agreed to meet with us next Tuesday. She paused, staring at the building. Maya, he seemed genuinely shocked when I mentioned the offshore accounts. I don't think Robert's professional circle knew about the hidden assets either. I flipped through the folder, correspondence between Robert and Brennan dating back to 2015. Most of it looked routine, but one letter caught my attention. It was from September 2019, right after Mom's kidney stone surgery. Asterisk Dick, need to discuss liability exposure regarding past support obligations. Ex-wife's medical situation has her asking questions about my financial capacity. Can we arrange a consultation about statute of limitations protections? Asterisk. He was worried about getting caught even then, I murmured, showing Diane the letter. Her hands clenched in her lap. I keep finding things, Maya. Yesterday I was cleaning out Robert's study and I found a whole filing cabinet I'd never seen inside of. Bank statements going back years, all for accounts I didn't know existed. What kind of statements? Investment accounts, CDs, even a safe deposit box I don't have a key to. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos she'd taken. Look at this one. The statement was for something called Chin Family Holdings LLC, with a balance of $180,000 as of last month. But what made my blood boil was the account description, Educational Fund, Future Generations. Educational fund? I laughed bitterly. He had an educational fund that could have paid for all 3 of us to go to college, while Emma worked nights at a grocery store to afford community college classes. There's more. Diane scrolled through more photos. This account has automatic deposits every month. Has for 3 years. Maya, your father was actively building wealth while you all struggled. I stared at the monthly deposits, $3,000 every single month like clockwork. In 1 year, he'd saved more for his secret educational fund than my entire family had earned. I need to see that filing cabinet. Everything in it. Diane nodded. That's why I wanted to meet here first. Madison's at school until 4. We can go to the house now, and you can photograph everything before our meeting with Brennan. 30 minutes later, I stood in Robert's home office for the first time since his funeral reception. The room was exactly what I'd expected from a man obsessed with hiding his wealth: mahogany desk, expensive leather chairs, and a wall of law books that probably cost more than Jake's annual medical expenses. But it was the filing cabinet that made me feel sick. 4 drawers, each meticulously organized and labeled. The top drawer was marked Asset Protection 2015 to 2018. The second, Family Liability Management. The third, Trust Planning M. Sullivan, Madison's original last name. The fourth drawer had no label, just a small padlock that Diane had already cut off. I started with the unlocked drawers, she said, pulling out hanging files. But this bottom drawer is what you really need to see. Inside were surveillance reports I hadn't seen yet, dozens of them. Photos of Mom at the grocery store, carefully selecting the cheapest items. Pictures of Emma grading papers in her car between her 2 jobs because she didn't have time to go home. Images of me falling asleep at a library table while studying, still wearing my pizza delivery uniform. But the worst were the medical surveillance reports on Jake. Someone had followed my brother to doctor's appointments and documented his condition in clinical detail. Asterisk subject displays moderate spastic diplegia, uses forearm crutches for mobility. Insurance appears to cover basic physical therapy only. Specialized equipment needs not being met. Asterisk. He knew, I whispered, holding a photo of Jake struggling with the front steps of our apartment building. He knew exactly what Jake needed and he chose to let him suffer. Diane had gone very still behind me. Maya, look at the dates on those medical reports. I flipped through them, noting the timestamps. They're all from last year, right after I stopped. These are from after Robert was diagnosed with cancer. He was dying, and he was still having you surveilled. Diane's voice was barely audible. Even when he knew he only had months left, he was spending money to document your family's struggles instead of helping. I found the final surveillance report, dated just 8 weeks before Robert's death. Asterisk financial pressure on subjects remains extreme. Primary subject, Linda Chen, observed taking on additional cleaning contracts despite apparent exhaustion. Recommend continued monitoring until estate settlement is finalized. Asterisk. Until estate settlement was finalized. He'd planned to spy on us right up until his death, to make sure we never discovered what he'd stolen from us. Diane, I said, turning to face her. I want every single person at that memorial service to see these photos. I want them to understand exactly what their generous friend Robert Chen did to his children while he was dying. Her face had gone ashen, but she nodded. When do you want to schedule it? I smiled, thinking of all those business associates who'd praised Robert's integrity, all the country club friends who'd admired his success story. Next weekend. And I want it held at the country club. I want to destroy his reputation in the place where he felt most proud of himself. The war was about to go public. The country club manager's voice was sickeningly sweet when I called to inquire about booking their memorial hall. Oh, you're Robert Chen's daughter. I'm so sorry for your loss. Your stepmother mentioned you might be planning a celebration of life service. Robert was such a generous member of our community. That's exactly what we want to celebrate, I said, gripping the phone tighter. His generosity. We'd like to invite everyone who knew him best, his business partners, his fellow club members, anyone who benefited from his charitable nature. By Wednesday, we had 53 confirmed attendees for Saturday's memorial service. Diane had been methodical in her invitations, reaching out to everyone in Robert's professional and social circles. She described it as an opportunity to share stories about the Robert you knew and loved, which wasn't technically a lie. I was in the middle of preparing my presentation when Emma called, her voice tight with anxiety. Maya, something weird happened at school today. This woman approached me in the parking lot, said she was a reporter from the Tribune. She was asking questions about Dad's estate, about our family's financial situation growing up. My blood turned cold. What kind of questions? Specific stuff. She knew about Jake's medical issues, knew about Mom's jobs, even knew about your student loan debt. How would a reporter know those details? I thought about the surveillance files, about Robert's business attorney Richard Brennan, about the 53 people who'd now been invited to Saturday's memorial service. Word was getting out, and someone was trying to control the narrative. Emma, don't talk to any reporters. Not until after Saturday. Why? Maya, what exactly are you planning for this memorial service? Before I could answer, my other line beeped. Diane's name flashed on the screen. I have to go. Just, trust me, okay? Everything will make sense soon. I switched to Diane's call. Please tell me you have good news. The opposite. Her voice was strained. Richard Brennan called me an hour ago. Maya, he's threatening to seek an injunction to stop the memorial service. On what grounds? Defamation of a deceased person. He says if we make unsubstantiated allegations against Robert's character, he'll pursue legal action against both of us for damaging his estate's value. I laughed, but it sounded hollow. His estate's value? We have bank records, surveillance photos, email evidence. He doesn't care. Brennan said even if everything we're claiming is true, airing it publicly could impact business partnerships, property values, even Madison's inheritance. He's playing hardball. I sank into my kitchen chair, staring at the presentation materials spread across the table. Photos of Jake struggling with his mobility, bank statements showing Robert's hidden millions, surveillance reports documenting our family's poverty, all of it meticulously organized to destroy a dead man's reputation. What does this mean for Saturday? It means we proceed very carefully. Diane's voice was steady now, resolved. I spoke with Patricia this afternoon. She says as long as we stick to documented facts and don't make emotional accusations, we're protected. We present evidence, not opinions. Diane, are you having second thoughts? Because if you're backing out. I'm not backing out. The steel in her voice surprised me. Do you know what I found today? Another filing cabinet in Robert's basement office. This one had Madison's college application essays from last year. Okay, and? He'd edited them, Maya. Her personal statement about overcoming financial adversity, about being grateful for her stepfather's sacrifices. He'd written notes in the margins about how to make their family situation sound more sympathetic to admissions committees. Diane's voice cracked. He coached my 17-year-old daughter to lie about financial hardship while your family was actually living it. I closed my eyes, picturing Madison crafting essays about struggle and perseverance while my sister worked 3 jobs and my brother's medical needs went unmet. Saturday's service is happening, I said firmly. Let Brennan file his injunction. By the time it goes through the courts, everyone in Robert's social circle will know exactly who he really was. There's something else, Diane said quietly. Madison wants to speak at the service. She wants to apologize to your family publicly. That stopped me cold. Diane, she doesn't need to. She insists. Said she benefited from stolen money and wants to acknowledge that. A pause. Maya, she's been researching cerebral palsy treatments online. She wants to know what kind of care Jake should have received with proper funding. I felt something crack in my chest, the rigid anger I'd been carrying for weeks, finally developing hairline fractures. Tell Madison she can speak, I said. But Diane? Saturday isn't going to be pretty. When I'm done, no one in that room will ever think of Robert Chen as generous again. Good, she replied. Because my husband was a liar and a thief, and I'm tired of pretending otherwise. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzle-soaked, which felt appropriate for what I was about to do. I stood in my bedroom at 7 a.m., staring at the black dress I'd laid out, the same one I'd worn to Robert's funeral 4 weeks ago. This time, though, I wasn't mourning. I was preparing for battle. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Brennan filed emergency injunction at 6 a.m. Hearing scheduled for Monday. You have today before any court orders take effect. Perfect. By Monday, it wouldn't matter what legal maneuvers Robert's attorney tried to pull. I was loading the presentation materials into my car when Emma called, her voice tight with panic. Maya, Mom knows. She saw the Tribune article online. Some reporter got hold of the surveillance photos. There's a picture of her leaving the diner at midnight, and the headline is Hidden Millions. Local businessman spied on ex-wife's poverty while concealing assets. My hand stilled on the box of documents. How is she handling it? She's been crying for 2 hours. Not sad crying, angry crying. She keeps saying she feels stupid for ever believing Dad was struggling. Emma's voice dropped. Maya, she wants to come to the memorial service today. I closed my eyes. I'd been trying to protect Mom from the worst details, planning to tell her everything after it was over. But the media had taken that choice away from me. Where is she now? In her car, driving to the country club. She said she wants to look Robert's friends in the eye when they learn the truth. At 10 a.m., I walked into the Riverside Country Club's Memorial Hall and immediately understood why Robert had loved this place. Everything screamed wealth and respectability: crystal chandeliers, mahogany paneled walls, oil paintings of long-dead rich men who'd probably hidden assets from their families too. Diane was already there, setting up a memory table with photos of Robert, but not the usual funeral pictures. These were images I'd helped her select: Robert at charity galas, Robert receiving community service awards, Robert giving speeches about integrity and family values. Every photo would become evidence of hypocrisy once the presentation began. 58 people confirmed, she said, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted a flower arrangement. Including Robert's business partners, 3 city council members, and the Tribune reporter who broke the story this morning. Good. I want witnesses. By 11 a.m., the hall was filled with exactly the crowd Robert would have wanted at his memorial: successful businessmen, prominent community leaders, wealthy socialites who'd praised his generosity at countless charity events. I recognized several faces from his funeral reception, people who'd told me what an inspiring success story my father had been. Mom sat in the front row with Jake and Emma, her spine rigid with fury. She'd dressed carefully for this, her best black suit, the pearl earrings she'd inherited from her own mother. She looked like she was attending a trial, not a memorial service. Which, in a way, she was. Richard Brennan arrived at 11:15, scanning the room with obvious concern. He'd brought 2 associates with him, legal backup, probably, in case I said anything actionable. He caught my eye across the room and gave me a warning look that I returned with my sweetest smile. At exactly 11:30, Diane stepped up to the podium. The room fell silent as she looked out at the assembled crowd, Robert's carefully curated audience of admirers and colleagues. Thank you all for coming to remember my husband, Robert Chen, she began, her voice steady. Many of you knew Robert as a generous man, a successful businessman, someone who worked hard to provide for his family. She paused, her eyes finding mine. Today, we're going to share some stories about Robert that you haven't heard before. Stories about the Robert his first family knew. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Diane clicked to the first slide of our presentation, and Robert's smiling face filled the projection screen behind her. It was a photo from last year's Riverside Business Excellence Awards, where he'd received recognition for outstanding community leadership. This picture was taken 14 months ago, Diane continued, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly tense room. The same month Robert hired private investigators to document his first wife's financial struggles. A murmur rippled through the audience. I saw Richard Brennan half rise from his chair, then apparently think better of it and sit back down. The next slide showed a surveillance photo of my mother leaving the diner at 11:47 p.m., her shoulders sagged with exhaustion. Someone in the audience gasped. Linda Chen, Robert's ex-wife, working her second job cleaning offices, Diane explained. This photograph was taken by investigators. Robert paid $18,000 to monitor his children's living conditions while he maintained 3 offshore accounts totaling $1.2 million. The murmurs grew louder. I watched the faces in the crowd, confusion shifting to disbelief, then dawning horror as the implications sank in. Mrs. Patterson from the ladies' auxiliary covered her mouth with both hands. David Kramer, Robert's golf partner, was staring at the screen like he was seeing a car accident. That's enough. Richard Brennan stood up, his face flushed red. This is inappropriate character assassination of a deceased. Sit down, Dick. The voice came from the back of the room, sharp and commanding. I turned to see a man in his 60s striding down the center aisle. Let her finish. Judge Morrison? Brennan looked stunned. Sir, this is highly irregular. What's irregular is a man hiding assets from child support obligations, Judge Morrison replied, taking a seat in the front row next to my mother. Continue, Mrs. Chen. Diane's hands had stopped trembling. She clicked to the next slide, bank records showing monthly deposits of $15,000 to $30,000 while Robert claimed he couldn't afford $800 child support payments. These deposits occurred regularly for 8 years, she said. Including this $25,000 transfer made 2 days after Robert's stepdaughter called asking for financial help with her teaching career. I saw Emma's face crumple as she recognized the date, the week she'd eaten ramen for 10 straight days because her paycheck was delayed. The next slide was the worst, medical surveillance photos of Jake at his physical therapy appointments, with clinical notes about his equipment needs going unmet. Robert's youngest son has cerebral palsy, Diane explained, her voice finally beginning to crack. While Robert documented his child's medical struggles in these $18,000 surveillance reports, he was simultaneously funding a $300,000 trust account for his stepdaughter's 18th birthday. The silence in the room was deafening now. I could hear the ventilation system humming, someone's phone vibrating against a chair. Mrs. Patterson was openly crying. But it was Madison who broke my heart. Robert's stepdaughter had been sitting quietly near the back, but now she stood up, her face pale and determined. I want to say something, she announced, walking toward the front of the room despite Diane's surprised gesture for her to sit down. Madison stopped directly in front of the projection screen, Robert's business award photo looming behind her like an accusation. My name is Madison Sullivan, she said, her 17-year-old voice steady despite her obvious nerves. Robert Chen was my stepfather for 8 years. He paid for my private school, my horse riding lessons, my car. She turned to look directly at my family. He spent more money on my Sweet 16 party than Jake Chen received in medical support his entire childhood. The crowd was riveted now, watching this teenager publicly demolish her stepfather's reputation. I'm going to Northwestern in the fall on money that should have paid for Emma Chen's education. I learned to ride horses with funds that should have bought Jake Chen proper medical equipment. Madison's voice grew stronger. And I never knew, because Robert taught me that generosity meant charity galas and tax-deductible donations, not taking care of the children you're legally obligated to support. She paused, wiping tears from her cheeks. So before anyone here calls Robert Chen generous again, remember that his generosity came at the cost of 3 children's childhoods. And remember that he died still paying investigators to spy on them instead of helping them. Madison walked back to her seat in complete silence. Then Judge Morrison began to clap. The applause spread slowly through the room like wildfire catching dry timber. First Judge Morrison, then my mother, then Emma, and Jake. Within moments, half the memorial hall was clapping for Madison's brutal honesty while the other half sat in stunned silence, their carefully constructed image of Robert Chin crumbling in real time. Richard Brennan's face had gone from red to purple. He stood again, this time with more authority. This entire proceeding is a sham designed to tell the truth? Judge Morrison's voice cut through Brennan's protest. Dick, I've known you for 20 years, and if you keep defending this behavior, I'm going to start questioning your ethics too. That's when I realized something that made my pulse quicken. Judge Morrison wasn't just a random attendee. He was family court. He'd probably seen hundreds of cases exactly like ours, deadbeat parents claiming poverty while hiding assets. I stood up, feeling the weight of 58 pairs of eyes on me. Your Honor, since you're here, maybe you'd like to see some additional evidence we found. Brennan shot to his feet. Absolutely not. This is not a courtroom, and Judge Morrison has no jurisdiction. Relax, Dick, Morrison waved him off. I'm here as Robert's friend, not as a judge. Though I have to say, if this case had come before my bench, your client would be facing contempt charges and asset forfeiture. I pulled out the folder I'd been saving for maximum impact, the one Diane had discovered just yesterday while cleaning out Robert's safe deposit box. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to share some final documents that really show who Robert Chin was. The first page I held up was a handwritten note dated just 3 months before Robert's cancer diagnosis. Asterisk contingency planning if health situation deteriorates. Ensure all protected assets remain invisible until statute limitations expire. Family cannot be allowed to discover true financial position under any circumstances. Asterisk. He knew he was getting sick, I announced to the room. And his first concern wasn't providing for his children or making amends. It was making sure we never found the money he'd stolen from us. Mrs. Patterson from the ladies' auxiliary stood up abruptly. I can't listen to any more of this, she said, her voice shaking. Robert donated $50,000 to our children's hospital charity last year. We gave him an award for his generosity to sick children. She was headed for the door when I called after her. Mrs. Patterson, would you like to know where that $50,000 came from? She stopped, her hand on the door handle. I held up another bank statement. It came directly from the Henderson Holdings account, the same account Robert used to hide money from his actual sick child. He literally took money that should have paid for Jake's medical care and donated it to charity so people like you would think he was generous. The room erupted. Voices rose in anger, confusion, disbelief. David Kramer was arguing with someone about tax write-offs. 2 women from the country club board were having a heated discussion about removing Robert's name from their donor wall. But it was the Tribune reporter frantically taking notes that made me smile. By tomorrow morning, everyone in the city would know exactly what Robert Chin had done to his family. There's one more thing, I announced, raising my voice over the chaos. The room gradually quieted. Robert's estate is worth $3.2 million after accounting for all hidden assets. Under state law, children are entitled to claim against estates for unpaid support obligations. Brennan went white. You can't be serious. 16 years of unpaid child support, plus interest, plus damages for emotional distress and surveillance. I looked directly at him. We'll see you in court, Mr. Brennan. All of this will be public record. Judge Morrison was grinning now. Maya, if you need a recommendation for a family court attorney, I know several excellent ones. As people began filing out of the memorial hall, some in disgust and others in solidarity, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Mom, her eyes red but fierce. I'm proud of you, she whispered. For the first time in 16 years, people finally know the truth about what he did to us. But I wasn't done yet. Monday's injunction hearing was going to be very interesting. The injunction hearing on Monday morning was held in Judge Morrison's own courtroom, which felt like poetic justice. Richard Brennan sat at the defense table with 2 junior associates, shuffling through what looked like hastily prepared motions. I could tell he was rattled. His usual polished confidence had been replaced by the frantic energy of a man trying to plug holes in a sinking ship. Your Honor, Brennan began, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. This public character assassination of my deceased client has caused irreparable harm to his estate's value and his surviving family members' emotional well-being. Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying Brennan with the expression of a man who'd seen this dance 1,000 times before. Mr. Brennan, are you disputing the authenticity of the financial documents presented at Saturday's memorial service? The authenticity isn't the issue, Your Honor. The issue is. Because I've had my clerk review the bank statements, surveillance reports, and correspondence that were entered into the public record this weekend. Morrison's tone was deceptively casual. Everything appears to be legitimate. Sworn affidavits, notarized documents, official bank records. Brennan's jaw tightened. Your Honor, even if these documents are authentic, there are proper legal channels for handling estate disputes. This public spectacle serves no legitimate purpose. Except justice, I interjected from the gallery, earning a sharp look from both attorneys. Patricia Holloway, who'd agreed to represent me pro bono after Saturday's revelations, stood smoothly. Your Honor, my client has every right to pursue unpaid child support through proper legal channels. The fact that Mr. Chin's deception has become public knowledge is simply a consequence of the evidence required to prove her case. Furthermore, Patricia continued, pulling out a thick folder, we've discovered additional assets since Saturday's service. Mr. Chin's business partners have been remarkably forthcoming with information since learning about his hidden accounts. That was news to me. I leaned forward, trying to catch Patricia's eye, but she was focused entirely on the judge. What kind of additional assets? Morrison asked. A second property in Scottsdale, Arizona, purchased under one of the shell companies. Current market value approximately $800,000. Patricia slid documents across to the court clerk. Also, investment accounts with Brennan and Associates that weren't disclosed in the original estate filing. The color drained from Richard Brennan's face. Those accounts are protected under attorney-client privilege. Not when they involve potential fraud, Mr. Brennan. Morrison's voice had gone ice cold. Are you telling this court that you were aware of hidden assets that should have been included in the estate disclosure? I watched Brennan realize he was about to become the defendant instead of the plaintiff. His hands were actually shaking as he gathered his papers. Your Honor, I need to request a continuance to properly review these allegations. Motion denied. Morrison's gavel came down with finality. Mr. Brennan, I'm dismissing your injunction request and ordering a full audit of Robert Chen's estate, including all assets managed by your firm. Ms. Chen, you're free to pursue your claims through normal probate proceedings. As we filed out of the courtroom, Patricia grabbed my arm. Maya, we need to talk immediately. What I didn't mention in there is that 3 of Robert's business partners contacted me yesterday. They want to cooperate fully with the asset recovery. Why would they do that? Because apparently your father's hidden accounts weren't just about avoiding child support. They think he was skimming money from their joint ventures too. Patricia's smile was sharp. His business associates are now more interested in recovering their own stolen funds than protecting his reputation. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. Madison found something in Robert's computer. You need to see this immediately. The war was expanding beyond anything I'd imagined. An hour after the hearing, I was sitting in Diane's living room staring at Robert's laptop screen, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Madison had discovered a password-protected folder labeled insurance policy buried in his files, and what we'd found inside made the offshore accounts look like pocket change. He was blackmailing people, Diane whispered, scrolling through dozens of files containing financial records, personal communications, and what appeared to be evidence of tax evasion by Robert's business associates. Maya, this goes back 12 years. The folder contained detailed dossiers on 15 different men, all wealthy businessmen in Robert's social circle. Each file documented extramarital affairs, unreported income, fraudulent insurance claims, and other secrets that could destroy careers and marriages. Look at the payment records, Madison said, pointing to a spreadsheet that made my hands shake. Dad was receiving $5,000 to $15,000 monthly from each of these guys. That's where the mystery deposits came from. I did the math quickly. 15 men paying an average of $8,000 per month each meant Robert was collecting roughly $120,000 monthly in blackmail payments. Over 12 years, that was nearly $17 million in extorted funds. This is why he could afford the surveillance, I realized, staring at a payment record from David Kramer, Robert's golf partner who'd been at Saturday's memorial service. He wasn't just hiding his legitimate income from us. He was funding his entire lifestyle through blackmail. Diane pulled up another file labeled Kramer_insurance_fraud 2019. Inside were photographs of Kramer's supposedly damaged yacht, insurance claim documents, and receipts showing the boat had never actually been repaired. David claimed $180,000 in storm damage, Diane read from the insurance paperwork. But Robert has photos proving the boat was fine. He's been paying Dad $12,000 a month for 4 years to keep quiet. My phone rang, Patricia's name on the screen. I answered immediately. Maya, where are you right now? I just got a very interesting call from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. The FBI? I looked at Diane, who had gone pale. Patricia, we just found evidence that Robert was blackmailing half the Riverside Country Club membership, yes. Someone called in a tip after Saturday's memorial service. The Bureau wants to interview you about the offshore accounts and any additional evidence you discovered. Through the window, I could see a black sedan pulling into Diane's driveway. 2 people in dark suits got out, moving with a purposeful stride of federal agents. They're here, I told Patricia, watching the agents approach the front door. Maya, listen carefully, Patricia's voice was urgent. Don't volunteer information about the blackmail files until I get there. The FBI will want to use that evidence for their own investigation, which could complicate your asset recovery case. The doorbell rang. Madison jumped up to answer it, then returned with 2 stern-faced agents who looked like they'd stepped out of a crime drama. Ms. Chen? I'm Special Agent Sarah Martinez, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We understand you've uncovered evidence of significant financial fraud involving Robert Chen's estate. I gestured to the laptop, where the blackmail files were still open on the screen. Agent Martinez, I think we've uncovered something much bigger than estate fraud. She leaned over to examine the screen, her expression sharpening as she read the file names. Her partner, Agent Thompson, was already photographing the documents with his phone. Ms. Chen, Martinez said slowly, how many people knew about these files before today? Just the 3 of us, Diane answered. Maya, Madison, and myself. Good. We're going to need you to stop looking through these files immediately and turn the laptop over to our forensic accountants. Martinez straightened, her tone becoming official. What you've discovered here appears to be evidence of a multi-million-dollar extortion operation that's been running for over a decade. I thought about David Kramer's shocked face at Saturday's memorial service, about Richard Brennan's panicked reaction in court that morning. Half of Robert's social circle had probably been paying him blackmail money while publicly praising his business acumen. Agent Martinez, I said, does this mean my father's victims might try to recover their extortion payments from his estate? Her smile was grim. Ms. Chen, when this investigation goes public, you're going to have a lot more competition for those hidden assets than you originally planned. 6 months after the FBI investigation began, I stood in the same country club memorial hall where I destroyed my father's reputation, but this time the room was filled with reporters, federal agents, and very nervous-looking wealthy men in handcuffs. The headline in that morning's Tribune read, Riverside Blackmail Ring Exposed, 15 Prominent Businessmen Arrested in $17 million Extortion Scheme. Special Agent Martinez approached me with a folder thick enough to use as a doorstop. Maya, the asset recovery is complete. Are you ready for the final numbers? I nodded, my hands surprisingly steady despite the magnitude of this moment. Robert Chen's estate, including all hidden accounts, blackmail proceeds, and recovered assets, $4.2 million. She paused. Your family's share, including 16 years of back child support with interest and damages, $1.8 million. The number hung in the air between us. $1.8 million. Enough to pay for Jake's specialized medical care for the rest of his life. Enough to cover Emma's student loans and send her to veterinary school like she'd always dreamed. Enough to buy Mom a house where she'd never have to worry about rent again. There's more, Martinez continued. The federal court is awarding your family an additional $500,000 in damages for the surveillance and emotional distress. And several of your father's blackmail victims have agreed to contribute to a settlement fund as part of their plea agreements. Behind her, I could see David Kramer in handcuffs being led away by 2 agents. He caught my eye through the crowd and actually had the audacity to look betrayed, as if I was responsible for exposing his insurance fraud instead of just uncovering my father's crimes. What about Diane and Madison? I asked. Mrs. Chen is keeping the house and her legitimate inheritance, minus the blackmail proceeds. Madison's college fund has been restructured. She'll still attend Northwestern, but the money now comes from recovered legitimate assets, not extorted funds. Martinez smiled slightly. That girl has been volunteering at Jake's physical therapy clinic every weekend since the investigation started. I think she's going to be okay. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. * physical therapist says I might not need the walker by next year. The new treatment is working. Emma's making celebration pancakes. *. I felt tears threatening for the first time in months. Not grief tears or anger tears, but something I'd almost forgotten existed, tears of relief. Agent Martinez, what happens to all those men who were paying Dad blackmail money? 15 federal indictments for conspiracy, tax evasion, insurance fraud, and about a dozen other charges. Your father's files were incredibly thorough. He documented everything. She shook her head. Honestly, Maya, Robert Chen was the most methodical criminal I've encountered in 20 years of financial crime investigation. Patricia Holloway appeared beside us, grinning like she'd won the lottery. Maya, the Riverside Country Club board voted unanimously to revoke Robert's posthumous membership and remove his name from all donor recognition. They're also establishing the Linda Chen Fund for single mothers facing financial hardship. I looked around the memorial hall where 6 months ago I'd exposed my father's lies to his friends and colleagues. Most of those same people were now either under federal investigation or publicly distancing themselves from Robert Chen's legacy. The man who'd spent 16 years hiding his wealth while his children suffered was finally facing consequences, even if he wasn't alive to see them. My phone rang. Mom's name on the screen. Maya, honey, I just got off the phone with the bank. The money came through. Her voice was shaking with emotions I couldn't identify. I made the final payment on Emma's student loans. All of them. She cried for an hour. What about Jake's treatment? Scheduled with the best pediatric neurologist in the state. He starts intensive physical therapy next month. She paused. Maya, I bought groceries today without checking the prices. Do you know how long it's been since I could do that? I closed my eyes, remembering 16 years of my mother working multiple jobs, wearing herself down to provide for us while Robert Chen documented our struggles and hid millions in offshore accounts. Mom, Dad's really gone now. Not just dead, his entire false legacy is destroyed. Everyone knows what he did to us. Good, she said firmly. Let them all know that Linda Chen raised 3 incredible children despite everything he took from us. Let them know we survived him. After I hung up, Agent Martinez handed me one final document. Maya, there's something else. We found a letter in your father's files, written just before his cancer diagnosis. It was addressed to you. My hands trembled as I opened the sealed envelope. Inside was a single sheet of Robert's letterhead, dated 8 months before his death. * Maya, if you're reading this, you discovered what I spent years hiding from you and your siblings. I always told myself I was protecting my future, but I know the truth. I was a coward who chose comfort over responsibility. You deserved a father who sacrificed for his children, not one who sacrificed his children for his own security. I can't undo 16 years of selfishness, but perhaps the money I stole from your childhoods can at least secure your futures. You were always the strongest of my children. I'm sorry it took my death for you to get what you deserved. **. I stared at the letter, feeling absolutely nothing. No forgiveness, no closure, no satisfaction. Just emptiness where my anger used to live. He knew, I said quietly. He knew exactly what he was doing to us, and he did it anyway. Agent Martinez nodded. Maya, in my experience, the worst financial criminals are often the ones who understand exactly how much damage they're causing. Your father wasn't confused or desperate. He was methodical. I folded the letter and slipped it into my purse. Someday I might show it to Emma and Jake, but not today. Today was about moving forward with the resources Robert Chen had tried to steal from us. As I walked out of the country club for the final time, I passed the donor recognition wall where my father's name had been removed, leaving only a slightly cleaner rectangle of marble. In 6 months, even that would fade. But Jake's new medical treatment would last a lifetime. Emma's veterinary school dreams were now fully funded. Mom would never have to work double shifts again. The forensic accountant had found $1 million in hidden assets, but we'd recovered something worth much more, the future Robert Chen had tried to steal from us. And everyone who'd ever called him generous now knew the truth about what his generosity had really cost.